Victoria Scott already knew what everyone else in the room was going to say. There were two candidates. One was perfect on paper, so perfect it almost felt irresponsible not to choose him. The other one made people uncomfortable, not because she was bad, but because she didn't fit the story executives like to tell themselves. Victoria listened as her leadership team spoke. They used words like obvious, safe, proven. By the time the last person finished, the decision felt unanimous. Victoria nodded, then she said something none of them expected. "Let me do the reference checks." Later that night, alone in her office, Victoria stared at two resumes. If she chose wrong, the company might not survive it. She picked one anyway. And that choice would save Meridian Logistics, while quietly destroying a leadership myth most businesses still believe. Victoria Scott was the CEO of Meridian Logistics, a mid-sized supply chain company struggling with culture problems, high turnover, low morale, decent profits, but everyone could feel something was broken underneath. The VP of Operations role had been vacant for 6 months. 3 people had quit or been fired in 2 years. The position was cursed, or so it seemed. This hire couldn't fail. Victoria needed someone who could fix operations and rebuild the culture, someone who could do both. After 3 months of searching, 2 candidates emerged from a pool of 73 applicants. Candidate A, David Brewster. The resume was flawless. MIT undergrad, Harvard MBA, 15 years at McKinsey Consulting, and then senior operations roles at 2 Fortune 500s. He'd optimized supply chains that saved companies tens of millions. He had case studies, awards, references from C-suite executives. The interview? Impressive, confident. He had frameworks for everything: Lean Six, Sigma, Kaizen, theory of constraints. When Victoria asked about a challenging scenario, David walked her through it like a business school case study, clear, articulate. The right answer every time. Candidate B, Michelle Coleman. State school degree, University of Houston. Started as a warehouse supervisor at a logistics company, worked her way up over 12 years to director of operations. Some gaps in her resume: 2 years caring for her mother during cancer treatment. Her interview was different, less polished. When Victoria asked about a time she'd failed, Michelle paused, really paused, and said, "I've failed a lot. Which failure do you want to hear about?" When Victoria presented a case study about cutting costs by 15%, David had outlined a detailed restructuring plan in 5 minutes. Michelle said, "I'd need to talk to the team first. I don't know what they're dealing with yet." Victoria's CFO, sitting in on interviews, scribbled on his notepad, "Doesn't have answers ready. Concerning." The executive team met to decide. The CFO spoke first. "David is the obvious choice. Look at his background. We need someone who can hit the ground running, not someone who needs to talk to the team first." The head of sales agreed. "Michelle seems nice, but we're not hiring nice. We're hiring competence. David has optimized supply chains at scale, and Michelle's biggest operation had 60 people." The head of HR added carefully, "Michelle's great culturally, but David has the technical chops we desperately need. Skills win here. 3 votes for David, 0 for Michelle." Victoria sat quietly. "Victoria?" the CFO pressed. "This feels unanimous." Victoria said, "Let me do reference checks. I'll make a decision by Friday." Victoria called David's references first. His former CFO at a manufacturing company was glowing. "David cut our logistics costs by 18% in year 1. Brilliant mind, very results-oriented." Victoria asked, "Would you hire him again?" A pause. "Of course, if the role fits." "What does that mean?" Another pause. "David's very focused on outcomes. He's not a handholder." Victoria called a former direct report, someone David hadn't listed, but whose name came up on LinkedIn. "David? Yeah, brilliant guy," the voice said carefully. "Gets results." "But?" Victoria asked. Silence. Anything you're comfortable sharing would help, Victoria said. The person sighed. Look, David's smart. Really smart. But he takes credit for other people's work. If you're on his team, you'll execute his vision brilliantly. And he'll tell leadership it was all him. 3 people on our team quit within a year. Good people. He burned them out and moved on. Would you work with him again? No, absolutely not. A pause. To be fair, some people thrived under David, the ones who could keep up. Victoria called Michelle's references next, her former boss at the logistics company. Michelle, she's the reason I stayed at that company as long as I did. She made everyone better. When I had a personal crisis, my kid was sick, she covered my shifts without being asked, not once, for 3 months. Victoria asked about Michelle's skills. She's not flashy, but she solves problems, real ones. She doesn't have a framework for everything, but she figures it out. And people trust her. That's rare. Victoria called a former warehouse worker who'd been on Michelle's team. He laughed when he heard her name. Michelle? Man, when she got promoted to director, the warehouse team pooled our money and sent her flowers. Nobody does that. You know why? Because she actually gave a damn. She learned everyone's names. She knew my daughter's name. She stayed late once to help me figure out my health insurance when my wife was pregnant. She didn't have to do that. What about her skills? And could she handle operations at scale? I don't know about at scale, he said, but I know she's the kind of person who'll figure it out, and she won't throw anyone under the bus doing it. Victoria sat in her office that night, staring at 2 resumes. David had everything on paper, the pedigree, the experience, the skills. Michelle had something else, something harder to measure. Victoria thought about Meridian's culture problem, the turnover, the exhaustion in her team's faces, the way people avoided eye contact in meetings. They didn't need another brilliant strategist who'd optimize the soul out of the company. They needed someone who'd rebuild trust. She made the call. Friday morning, Victoria told her executive team, "I'm hiring Michelle." The CFO looked stunned. "Victoria, with all respect, why? And David is objectively more qualified." Victoria said, "David's brilliant, but his teams don't trust him. He burns people out. He takes credit for their work. In 18 months, we'd have better processes and a worse culture." And Michelle? Michelle makes people better. Her teams would walk through walls for her. She doesn't have all the answers, but she'll build a team that does. And they'll actually want to stay. The CFO shook his head. "I think you're making a mistake." Victoria nodded. "Maybe, but I'd rather bet on character and teach skills than bet on skills and hope character appears." Michelle's first month? She spent it on the warehouse floor and in one-on-ones. She discovered the team was drowning in bureaucracy. Every decision required 3 approvals. She cut it to 1. Then she found out the previous VP had blamed individuals publicly for systemic failures. She ended that immediately. When a major shipment error happened in week 2, Michelle gathered the team and asked, "What broke in our process?" Not, "Who messed up?" The team exhaled for the first time in 2 years. Meridian's operations didn't transform overnight. There was no revolutionary new framework, no brilliant McKinsey playbook. But things ran smoother because people actually communicated. Problems got surfaced early instead of hidden. Mistakes were admitted, not covered up. Michelle didn't have all the answers, but she asked good questions. She listened. When someone on her team had a better idea, she said, "Let's try that," and gave them credit in leadership meetings. 6 months after Michelle started, the numbers told a story. Turnover dropped, not because Michelle tolerated mediocrity, but because the high performers finally had a reason to stay. The 3 high-potential employees who'd been quietly interviewing elsewhere, they withdrew their applications. One told Victoria, "I actually want to come to work now." Engagement scores rose, and profitability up 11%. Not from genius strategy, but from a team that finally trusted each other enough to collaborate. Meanwhile, David Brewster joined a competitor. He implemented an aggressive restructuring plan, cut costs by 20% in year 1. 18 months later, that company's Glassdoor rating tanked. Reviews mentioned toxic leadership and brilliant but brutal culture. 3 senior managers quit within 6 months. David's LinkedIn showed he was looking for his next role. Victoria ran into Michelle in the break room one afternoon. Michelle was helping a new hire troubleshoot a vendor issue, something technically outside her role. Victoria asked, "Do you ever regret not having the fancy MBA, the McKinsey experience?" Michelle smiled. "Sometimes I wonder what that would have been like. But honestly, I learned more on a warehouse floor than I ever could have in a classroom. You learn who people really are when things go wrong at 2 a.m. and nobody's watching." Victoria nodded. "I'm glad you're here." "Me too," Michelle said. A year later, Michelle was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. David's LinkedIn listed him as open to new opportunities. Victoria kept both resumes in her desk drawer, not as a reminder of who she hired, but as a reminder of what she almost missed. Because the best candidate on paper isn't always the best person for the job, and the most impressive resume doesn't always belong to the most effective leader. There's a hard truth about hiring that most companies learn too late. Skills can be taught, systems can be learned, processes can be documented, but character, that's already there, or it isn't. You can train someone to read a P&L statement. You can't train someone to care about the people behind the numbers. You can teach frameworks and methodologies. You can't teach someone to give credit instead of taking it. Michelle still doesn't have an MBA. She's still not on LinkedIn's top voices list, but her team would follow her anywhere. Some credentials only matter on paper. The ones that matter in practice, those can't be printed on a resume. What matters more? What someone knows, or who they are when nobody's watching. Subscribe to Tales by Cathie for stories that explore what leadership really looks like.